All right, 4:00 p.m. I'm going to call the meeting to order. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Before we start the meeting, I just want to give a personal shout out to my cousin, Jeremy Harris, and his wife, Liz, who have traveled from Wolverhampton in England to be at this meeting. No, they're here for other reasons too. And they're sitting with my son, Jacob, who has never been to a council or a committee meeting. So I would like everyone on their best behavior this evening. So, any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being on, we'll go to the consent items. We are going to be pulling item 2.4. Are there any other items we're pulling?
Yes.
2.5? Pulling or just speaking to it?
Let's pull 2.5.
All right. Councillor Lehman?
Give me 10 seconds. Talk to my families.
They would know it would be all lies if I said anything about it myself.
Let's have some questions. 2.5, 2.6, 3.1.
I'm sorry, but I'm just doing the consent items.
Oh, just consent items. Sorry.
Yeah. So would you like 2.6 pulled, or you just want to ask questions? I'll pull it.
Yeah, just one topic.
Okay, so 2.4, 2.5, and 2.6 would be pulled, and anything else? No? We'll put the balance of the consent items. Somebody prepared to move them? Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Anything further? So we'll call the vote on that. No? Okay, yes? You have another matter you want to pull, or you want to speak to a matter?
Yes, there's a number of matters I was going to speak to. So.
Okay, well, we're just moving and seconding it, and so if you'd like to speak, now would be a great time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I noticed I had a couple questions here. The first one's on 2.2 to staff. So this was the Southdale Road and Wickerson Road. My question was, what's the expected value of the actual work that will be done? Have we got a sense of that? Right now, we're just asking for the detailed design.
We're not voting yet. Someone prepared to speak to that,
Yeah.
Mr. McRae?
Through the chair, I hesitate to guess at the risk of giving you an incorrect number, but I believe it's in the order of $15 million, somewhere in that range. But if you need a better number, I'd be happy to follow up and provide you a more accurate estimate.
Actually, that number is fine. It's kind of an order of magnitude. Give me a sense of that. I'm happy with that. And now the 2.3. I've got a note here, and it may actually refer to a question as well that one of the residents was asking about paving. Sometimes we start working a project and then it's just left for weeks or months until it gets completed. And I wanted to ask about that sort of situation. What do we have in place to make sure that the construction continues in a timely fashion?
There's many different types of construction projects, so without knowing the details of the specific project that the question relates to, I can only talk in generalities, but we do, in the interest of minimizing the impacts to Londoners, try to keep construction projects and their schedules minimized, and we also factor in key events and schedule and like milestones and avoiding higher impact times, trying to work to minimize disruptions. With respect to paving in particular, oftentimes we will leave the surface course paving until the following year so that the settlements related to excavations for underground pipes, such as sewers and water mains, have time to settle so that we can address any disformities in the surface before the final surface course paving goes on. So that's a couple of indications. But again, if there's a specific project that you'd like to talk to, we could take that offline.
Thank you. One was historical, so that was the question the resident had, but it seemed like we were gonna see similar situations coming up here. I'm happy to talk about that offline and get that answer for the resident.
Do you have other items you wanted to comment on, Councillor?
The other items I see have been pulled, so I think not right now. If there's someone
All right.
else who has a question.
On the ones that are not being pulled? Yes. Okay, go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff in regards to item 2.2. Looking at our plans for that road and reading underneath preferred design of comment in there, a future consideration and accommodation will be given to connections of cycling infrastructure in the area. Looking to see what we're planning for that area and the reasoning of why it's not integrated into this plan, but rather future plans.
Through the chair, the comment about future plans relates more to plans outside of the project limits, such as multi-use paths that would link in to the road right of way in the future. So I believe there's plans for multi-use paths in particular, and accessing the bowler lands. So we're doing everything we can within the project, but it's more the external surrounding developments that it's going to be coordinated with.
Anything further from any councillors on those items? All right, it's been moved and seconded. We'll call the vote on all the items except 2.4, 2.5, and 2.6.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
And item 2.4, Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff, looking at the background section of, this came up last night at the PEC meetings and then certainly today. Underneath the context, just reading that institutional development, including the future Gateway Casino site, more disappointment that it's still a proposed site. It has not been approved by council yet, and stating in this report several times over that this is servicing the future site of Gateway Casino is not accurate, and I'm raising that concern.
So your concern is that in the report it's being described as having been approved when it hasn't yet? All right. That's fair. That's a fair point, I suppose, and I suppose staff is going to say sorry about that. We made a mistake.
Absolutely, through the chair. So we just wanted to acknowledge that from a context piece, but absolutely you're correct. And in the future, we'll try to ensure that a problem like that doesn't occur again.
Anything else on 2.4? Councillor Van Holst?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the construction impacts for that. It's going to be, this sewer extension will be along Wonderland Road. We're going to tear up Wonderland Road. Does it have to go along Wonderland Road? Can we get out there through some other route? So I guess those are my questions.
Through the chair, there will be a portion of Wonderland Road that we do need to expose and work through as part of this project. For the most part, this sanitary sewer has to service both sides of the road, so either way you're going to have an impact. The good thing about it, though, is that there will be an improvement to the roadway, as you've probably all driven up and down Wonderland Road and seen that there's some concerns with some of the asphalt on that area, so this will allow for that improvement as well. So we have concerned looked at all the alternatives as far as how we service the lands, and it will have an impact on the road, and that's what we found to be the most appropriate design.
Anything further on 2.4? Councillor Pelosa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me again. And a question to staff. just realizing under the work description that we're including a turning lane into the proposed future Gateway Casino site. If we approve this now, but it doesn't pass at council next week, is that potentially a conflict of what we're tendering or asking for versus what we decide?
Through the chair, regardless of the decision on Gateway, this is likely a parcel that would see development of some intensity, and the turning lane would probably be a logical thing to have to support any future development, given the size of that parcel. If there's no development at all in that location, then we would have to adjust the scope with the consultant and ultimately the contractor.
Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you, and I just want to point out that we learned yesterday that there is already a left-hand turn lane into that property, so I think there wouldn't be a change to the road because of this project.
Anything further on item 2.4? Somebody prepared to move it? Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Anything further? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passed 5-0.
In item 2.5, I'm sorry, I don't recall who asked that to be polled. Councillor Van Holst or Councillor Lehman? One of you can go, it's fine. Councillor Lehman?
Thank you, Chair. I have three questions to staff. First of all, let me say I'm glad what jumped out at me from this report is I'm happy that we are really addressing plastic recycling with China dropping off receiving our plastic. I think we are in for challenges on how we're going to deal with plastic. The second thing is that I'm happy to see industry, the plastic industry, stepping up and realizing they have to be part of the solution. And thirdly, as I was happy to read that we are lobbying higher levels of government to address single-use plastic at the consumer purchase point. First question, through you, Chair, to the staff. The irony was not lost on me that we were using plastic bags to collect plastic. Do we see the bags being single-use bags, or are they going to just empty the trash into the recycling trucks and leave the bag for future pickup?
Through the chair, yes, definitely there is a touch of irony, a plastic bag to recover plastic items. The product itself is about the size of a large merchandise bag from a retail store. The system that's in place in the United States is essentially this orange bag. And the reason they have that is that the materials they're attracting are very light and fluffy and soft, ranging anywhere from a small chip bag right through to a flexible plastic pouch that holds juice, for example. So these items on their own have the propensity to blow around the neighborhood. So the bag is seen as an ideal carrier to capture the materials. The other thing to do with this program, the Orange Bag Program, is that it is designed where everything in that bag then goes off to end market. So there's no further handling of the material. So the rationale for the bag is it is stuffed when it's full. It will be placed inside the blue box. It'll then go through the sorting system where it is removed as a single item. So the bag actually serves a very good purpose. In the US, the whole collection and processing system, including the marketing, is all captured in the price of the bag. So how that program ultimately rolls out in Canada is obviously part of the pilot project, but the initial stages of it are just to really understand how homeowners here in London under the pilot project will take on the additional responsibilities of separating these items. Right now, they're actually, for the most part, placed inside a garbage bag. So in some respects, it's a bag replacing a bag. So these are all really, it's a good question. I do scratch my head at times how to do this, but finding a convenient way for homeowners to participate in practice has worked reasonably well in the pilot projects in the United States.
I've been reading a lot about collection of plastics, and because there's not a lot of institutions that know how to deal with it, the benefit sometimes is wasted just on the delivery cost and environmental footprint of getting the plastic from, let's say, London to wherever we're gonna be sending it. So where would we be sending it?
Through the chair, so if I step back in time when we were first contacted about this project, in the States, they look at very sophisticated technology like pyrolysis and gasification. When we met with the key proponents of this, Dow and Hefty, we indicated that in Ontario, plastic end markets are taking off, and we don't want to disrupt those end markets. We want to see if we can actually work with them. So we're going to look at opportunities to see where this material could, one, first be recycled in Ontario. There are 2 end markets in Barrie and actually next door in Cambridge that are showing some interest at this point in time, but they don't really have any material to play with. And so part of the pilot project will be to create a bale of material for them to actually get a good handle of. The other end markets we're looking at would be more along the lines of the sophisticated technology pyrolysis. There's one facility that is planned to be built in Belleville, Ontario. There's one operating in Nova Scotia. And there's also one further into the United States that Dow already has a relationship with. So the key goal of the pilot project is material will not be sent to landfill. So it'll be from first priority. If we can get any of this material recycled, that'll be ideal. If not, it'll go off to one of the energy or chemical recycling markets.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, one final question. We're starting to push a lot of the work of handling refuse down to the consumer, down to our households. Right now, they separate garbage, they separate recyclables, and then within the recyclables, they need to make sure they keep containers in one container and paper in another. And if they mess up, they get a warning or that it's not picked up. Are we getting into the danger of turning people off of the recycling effort if the more and more of the sorting process is pushed down to their level? They'll just throw up their hands and throw everything into the garbage bag?
Through the chair, we've heard that concern from, I wouldn't say lots, but from enough that it is something where we do sit back and try to be very realistic on what we're asking. There are some communities that went to what's referred to as a single stream sorting system. All the materials are placed into one container. We've never done that in London, and as staff and working with committee and council, we've never really supported that single stream system, in part because the materials are all mixed together and you're then relying on the facility to separate them to meet more stringent end market requirements, as you refer to. So the work we ask the homeowners to do, the 2 separation system, we do find is actually quite reasonable. There was a day when it was actually 3 complete sorts. And some communities were as high as 5. So it is a fine balance. We think we're being reasonable right now. There will be a push in the future when industry takes over more of the system and pays for these services, that some of these things will become even further dictated. There might be more return to vendor. There could be more deposit return type systems. So I'd like to think things will get less complicated, but that's something that no one can guarantee at this point in time. But it is a fine balance. But overall, we think we've got a reasonable system in place.
I'm just going to go to another councillor ahead. You're done? Perfect then. Councillor Pelosi, I think you wanted to ask. Did you want to ask something? Or I'm sorry, Councillor Van Holst was next. My apologies.
Thank you very much. So this is great and exciting news for a couple reasons, but one for sure is that London was chosen as a pilot partner as the first city in Canada. And this is great to hear. I like seeing this because it brings other opportunities to us that you might not expect. And I've noticed this with some of the research we've done in, for instance, London Hydro. All of a sudden, people realize, hey, London's doing interesting things, and they have data that we can use, and they have citizens that are willing to participate in these types of projects, and that brings benefits to us. And of course, the first benefit we're going to see is a greater diversion of things from the landfill, because we've got an opportunity to throw these things away. Mr. Chair, I used to teach physics, and I would show videos at times. And one was a technology where invented by a Japanese person who would collect things like bags from the store and put them in and basically turn it back into fuel, turn it to oil that could be used. And so this is kind of what we're doing. And what people learned was, hey, these things are valuable. There's something we can do with this, and they feel good about separating those. Because we do recognize there's good value in doing this, I'm interested in what can be achieved by the expanded trial. So we've been presented with a couple of investments that we can make in this project, and one of them is a little less expensive. There's a medium one, and the expanded trial is about $200,000 more, and that's a pretty small investment to get some what's potentially good data. So I want to know what we would get from that expanded trial if we went for the extra investment, because that again might show that we're even more willing to attract these kinds of new ideas and have companies partner with us. So my question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff is, what would we accomplish by going with the expanded trial?
Through the chair, what we brought to you tonight is what we refer to as our basic program, what we can deliver for the budget that we have approved at the city, and then, of course, the amount that has come forward from the plastics industry and from Dow. Other funders are interested and are waiting to hear the reaction from committee and council on this project. Essentially, it would be doing more of what we want to do in this pilot project. More, for example, waste audits. Waste audits will give us a good handle on the types of materials that are being recovered to provide a better understanding of the recycling potential. Right now, we have 2 that would be scheduled within the existing budget. Other funders that could come forward would help further complete more waste audits, more information, and take more information to the marketplace to encourage others to get a better handle on what can be recycled and what can be recovered from a fuel and energy perspective. So really, it's adding to the base project is the best way to look at it. When we get into potential funders such as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, we wish to approach them. Their main goal on a project like this is to create results that can be shared then with other municipalities. So it then becomes a contribution from London to other municipalities. We've taken advantage of programs like that before, and have also had results shared from other municipalities to be used here in London. So it is basically just an expansion of the existing program. It is not more households participating at this point in time. It is just doing more analysis on the materials and the participation rates. Getting stronger data, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to make a motion after perhaps a little more discussion that we invest in the comprehensive pilot project. Is there anything other than an additional investment that would be involved? Should we go forward with that? My question through you to Mr. Stanford.
Mr. Chair, at this point in time, it actually wouldn't be additional investment from the city. When we meet with FCM and chat with our representatives, the fact that the city over a 2-year period would be putting in $25,000 per year or $50,000 meets their minimum criteria to apply for their grant program. So we're able to actually have our money apply to different funding applications. Should that not be the case, we'd be happy at that point in time when we have something more concrete to bring forward a report. But right now, the investment that the city's put forward can make these other 2 ones happen at this point in time. We're comfortable with that.
Okay, so thank you. That's encouraging. So we're planning to invest then.
Councillor, just so I understand, are you making a motion? Are you just? I'd just like to know where we're going. So are you asking a question, or do you want to make more comments, or?
Okay, Mr. Chair. Well, I want to ask a question, which is
Okay.
what I started.
Okay, so this will be your last question before I go to another councillor, and then we can come back to you.
Thank you. That's fine. So my question then is, just for clarification, we are then hoping to invest $275,000 in this? Is that's what or is that, we're investing a part, I guess, 25,000 per year for 2 years? Is that all we're investing, the 50,000?
Through the chair, that is correct. And as we move into the more comprehensive programs, our investment does not have to change at this point in time. So we are still eligible to go for the higher amounts. In fact, this would be new money coming in that just basically is brought in because industry has become the prime funder of this. Others are attracted to that amount and feel that industry has done their share here. So we're comfortable going after the other ones without any further city dollars.
Well, that's great strategy then. Thank you, and I hope we do that.
Councillor Pelosi, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and a comments prior to a question of thank you for bringing this forward, as the landfill is located in Ward 12. Residents are always wondering what more we can do as the city's garbage ends up on their doorsteps after it goes in. And I've been getting lots of questions about what more we can do as a city and mindfulness about the waste that we create. Hearing your comments about the bags are picked up as a single item, go to the end user for their processing. Certainly would be liking that to be more local and certainly not end up on the other coast of the country. So hopefully GTA area. My question in particular for you lies within the grant conditions and funding distribution, that within 6 months we're to have 20,000 households participating. What do they deem as participating? Is that just they've been given the bags or that they're actually actively using the bags? Just wondering what the financial repercussions could be if Londoners don't take to this project as we had hoped.
Through the chair, always a fascinating part of a pilot project because it's tough to predict reaction. The first round of bags is clearly provided to the homeowner. We believe it's anywhere from a 6-month or potentially upwards of 1 year supply of bags. If others are brought into the project, we're able to then perhaps offer the bags next time around at half the price. And at that point in time, we don't believe some Londoners will want to participate. It's one, when it's free, but two, when they've got to perhaps pay $2 to $4, there's a different reaction. That's part of the measurement that we have to get a sense of how many people want to participate. So initially, we think this will be reasonably well received. Participation is measured by typically, are you involved at least once per month? That is how we measure our current recycling program right now. And our recycling program tracks anywhere between 90 and 93% on average participation. The set out, what we refer to in our report, refers to how often someone actually has material at the curb. That's why we measure participation once a month, but set out is usually typically lower. Blue boxes are not always at the curb. So we think something like this right now, because plastics are a challenge out there. We hear about the issues, so we think that this is an opportunity for some people. We're not discouraging reuse. In fact, we're encouraging it. Reduction, always a high priority. You see in our report, we talk about what London is now doing and has been doing for a number of years, and we plan on actually coming forward with more comprehensive actions. For plastics, it will require everything working to really get a good handle on that, because it is a good material that has good value in society. It is how we manage it after that is when we're falling apart a bit.
Thank you, Chair. I promise I'll be brief. I'll tell you one thing I've learned living across the road from a park now is that the wind certainly blows these items everywhere. So I'd happily give you $2 for a bag right now, Mr. Stanford, because I've been picking up a lot of those kind of plastics from my own yard. But I just want to thank the staff for their work on this. Anything that we can do to reuse and recycle plastics is good for the environment. It's consistent with some of the items in our strat plan, and saying thank you for the work. I am prepared to move the staff recommendation.
I'm prepared to second it. Councillor Pelosi, anything further, councillors? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Item 2.6, I think that's Councillor Lehman.
This is a project that's in my ward, and it's going to be factors that we'll be talking about later on in the meeting about private drain connections. On the premise that what is being recommended gets passed here and passed at council, wondering what can be done about this project so that it would qualify for the change to our policy.
Somebody prepared to answer this one?
Through the chair, as far as the transitional policy for this, we haven't established that at this point. So our first process was just to get this into a bylaw change. So that would have to go through council and then the bylaw be finally changed. The thought would be that we could roll it out as quickly as possible. That would be subject to our current budget limitations, so I'd have to take that back to our team. We do know that we'd be able to bring this forward as part of the multi-year budget in 2020, but we'd have to do an assessment for 2019 if we want to roll it out as soon as possible.
How would that affect this particular project? Because I think that we're looking at getting going probably in August on this one.
If the councillor is okay with this, we'd like to take that back, and I can follow up with a response on it. I don't think it would be a problem to be able to bring it forward this time, but we'd have to, the time frame would be very critical because we need to make sure this gets through council first, but we can come back to you with a response on that.
Anything further on this matter? Someone prepared to move it? Councillor Lehman, seconder. Councillor Lewis, anything further? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
We're now going to move on to the scheduled items. The first is item 3.1, and it's a public participation meeting, so we'll need a motion to open the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Anything further? We'll call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Did staff have a presentation, or does the report speak for itself? No presentation? All right. That being said, then, we will call on the public. Unfortunately, my family's deserted me. I think they've gone to a restaurant. I was actually going to publicly thank them I had to go pick them up yesterday for keeping me away from a very exciting planning meeting, but I don't have that opportunity to do it publicly with them here. So we'll go up to the gallery and go ahead, sir. Give us your name, your address if you want, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, councillors and members of committee. My name is Mike Wallace. I'm the Executive Director of the London Development Institute, and I'm here very briefly to thank the engineering staff and everyone involved on the discussion on this committee. They were very proactive. Your staff was very proactive in communicating with the industry on these particular items, particularly the PDC cleanout issue, and we're happy to see it here tonight and fully support of the recommendation in front of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone further from this side to the middle who wishes to speak? All right. Anybody up here on this side wish to speak? Going once, going twice? We'll move to, if someone will move it, we'll close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We will call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
We have a bylaw before us. I think that's what we're supposed to be moving, unless there's any questions or comments. Committee?
That's what you just voted on, right?
No, we vote on the public participation. Someone prepared to move then the recommendation? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any discussion? I'll call the vote. Councillor Van Holst?
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Moving on to item 4.1, which is a parking bylaw amendment, S. Cone 553 Paul Mall Street. There is a letter, I believe, on file. Am I right? With regard to this, maybe staff could just explain the background very briefly and if they have any thoughts on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a street where you're allowed to park between the sidewalk and the road along the grass boulevard on your driveway space. In this case, there's an ask for us to amend the bylaw to preclude commercial vehicles because of concern about a sight line regarding a van that parks legally at that location. Bylaw is not able to be here today, but they have actually measured the size of this vehicle. It is not considered a classified commercial vehicle. It would be a private vehicle. So the recommendation from bylaw and staff would be to receive this letter.
Councillors? Councillor Van Holst?
I'll move receipt.
We have a seconder. Councillor Lehman, anything, questions, comments? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to our staff. I know that residents can petition for no parking zones on their street. I know I've got a couple of residents, or a couple of constituents who are doing that right now and going through wanting to establish no parking zones for on-street parking. And I recognize that this particular request from the public was specific to a commercial vehicle, and it was deemed that this was not in fact a commercial vehicle. Would it still allow those residents concerned to ask for an amendment to the parking bylaw in general? I suspect that they probably would not want to do so because some of them probably avail themselves of this parking for personal use, but is that still an option for them?
Through the chair, so parking is already precluded on this street, so on-street parking is not permitted at this location. In this case, the person is parking on the part of their driveway that transects the boulevard between the roadway edge and the sidewalk, essentially. It's quite a wide boulevard. So if there were to be a decision to preclude private vehicle parking on that sort of a driveway configuration, it would have to apply to all residents and all types of vehicles.
Anything further? All right, call the vote. The motion is to receive the correspondence only.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Next matter is item 4.2, which is a request for compassionate compensation for private drain connection from Ms. Ramsey. I know Ms. Ramsey's here. Thank you very much for coming. Am I right or am I wrong that she's here? Thank you very much for coming. I just thought staff could comment on this in terms of if there's the funding for something like this and whether we have a fund for this.
Through the chair, we don't currently have any kind of a program to subsidize this. We do get some requests from time to time, and in the past, we do have the two options available. One is that they pay up front, or the other option is that it be put onto their property taxes over a period of 10 years at an interest rate of 2.97%. So those are the only two options that we have as per the bylaw.
Okay, committee? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly, through you to staff, appreciate that there's not a fund for these particular things. Would it not be more appropriate in this case for the resident to seek through our risk management department compensation that way? If in fact the damage is being caused by the roots of a tree on a city boulevard. And I know that, you know, individuals sometimes seek compensation for vehicle damage due to potholes or things like that. Would that be an appropriate source of potential financial assistance for the resident in this case?
Go ahead.
So I won't speak for risk management. We could make that connection. It would be up to them to assess that. I would leave it at that.
Would you be looking for motion to refer this to risk management, and is that something you would be interested in? I don't know.
I think that's exactly what I'd like to do, Mr. Chair. I did read the applicant's letter. I understand that this is not the first time that this situation has occurred, and I certainly believe that she's communicating in good faith that she believes, based on the situation, that the damage is being caused by a source of damage on city property. So I think that the city does have a role to play there. So I think that that is where I was intending to go with this, is to see if that would be appropriate.
All right, so you're prepared to make that motion that we refer this matter to risk management. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lehman, any further discussion? All right, we'll call the vote on that, and then I will explain it to you what we're doing. Just so you're aware, what we're trying to do is find compensation for you. We don't have a bylaw to allow this, but we're trying to refer it to our department that deals with risk management, which is fault matters, and see if they can compensate you. I can tell you that I've had a resident where a tree that was on the city boulevard fell over and damaged their car, and they were compensated for that. So it may be something that we can get you help with, all right? If this passes, it hasn't passed yet.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, I'd just like to point out that at any time, a resident could make the claim, contact our claims department anyway. You don't need to come through council to do that, but we're just saving you that step, if this passes.
Motion is up. It's been moved and seconded. If you could have a look. Just referring the matter to risk management. So anything further? If not, I'm going to call the vote. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much for coming. I hope that provides you with some assistance. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4.3, which is the Victoria Bridge replacement, detailed design and tendering and appointment of consulting engineer. Is there a report, or does the report speak for itself? Somebody wanted to?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. We believe the report does speak to itself. This is the intent to move forward with the approved plan by council and start the design process to replace this important piece of infrastructure.
Thank you. Committee? Mr. Councillor Van Holst, I know you have something.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, I'll first say to our committee that the note that I wrote and the Victoria Bridge replacement detailed design tendering appointment of a consulting engineer report are on our agenda this is a coincidence. I thought that this was coming at some future date from the staff, and so I wanted to have another option available for us when this item arrived. So that's why you see these both at the same time. It's a coincidence. So just to remind council and maybe inform those who weren't here previously in the last council, that this came forward for the replacement of the Victoria Bridge, and the recommendation is for a through-arch bridge. And I had asked what the price was for a more standard bridge, which is the concrete girder bridge, and found out that it was $2.3 million less expensive. And my goal at that time was to suggest to council that we not do the fancier bridge, if you will, and instead do a plain bridge, and then perhaps look at some way of providing public art or some other means to provide the aesthetic improvement that was requested by the residents at the PICs. So at this point, I think what I'll be doing is voting against this recommendation of staff, and then asking us to go back to the concrete girder bridge, and then perhaps we look at another option as well. So that just lets you know what I'm going to do is vote against this. My concern is that there are bigger priorities for us, specifically housing is my concern. And I see that this is a place where we could save a substantial amount of money on a capital project. And I think that we would be better off investing it in the problems that have been articulated recently about housing. So I'll have more to speak on this, but perhaps I'd leave that to my colleagues to comment on as well.
All right, so we're dealing with the main motion, which is the staff recommendation at this point in time, which the councillors indicated he will vote against. So if councillors wish to speak to that item. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to both comment on and perhaps seek some clarification from staff on, because I agree with Councillor Van Holst that on this particular bridge option, and my understanding is we have approximately a $50 million or so list of bridge repairs that need to be undertaken in the city right now. I mean, by right now, that's our to-do list. It's not that every one of them has to happen within the next year or two, but there are repairs pending in the $50 million range. And when we go for an option that has, you know, all of the, you know, colloquially, all the bells and whistles at a cost of an extra $2.3 million when we don't have money to spare at this point, frankly, it's a little concerning to me, particularly when we're talking about, you know, a PIC that attracted 17 residents. And I hear from literally hundreds of people already about the housing repairs that we need. In the winter, and I know we're going to get to winter program maintenance, I hear from hundreds of people about the snow removal efforts and their desire to see better there, although that would be an operating cost and not a capital cost. So I'm concerned when we have something that has a $2.3 million extra price tag for what seems to be purely aesthetic reasons. I haven't heard that a more traditional bridge couldn't meet the higher, and that's going to be one of the questions to staff, would other bridges be able to meet the higher profile? Because I did note in the report the 100-year storm event and the advantage of the recommendation providing greater gap for the 100-year storm event in the case of floods. I saw that the staff recommendation indicated that you know, the proposed model doesn't have anything in the water, pier-wise, but what's there has a pier in the water already, if I'm not mistaken. And we certainly, as a council, followed a staff recommendation on Springbank Dam that said we're not in a hurry to remove structures from the water. So I'm not sure why this one is different. So through you to staff, would a more cost-effective bridge option still be able to meet the desire to change the bridge profile so that the 100-year flood event concerns might still be addressed? That's question one. And question two would be, because an EA has taken place on this, what kind of EA revision or amendment would be necessary if we decided to go with an option that left the current, I guess it's an H foundation frame pier in the water and built off of that?
All right, someone from staff?
Through the chair, the environmental assessment was a thorough process, and as per the requirements of the EA Act, it considers various aspects of the environments, the social, cultural, economic. And there's multiple inputs that led us to the recommendation that was endorsed by council last year. In addition to the public feedback, there's a cultural heritage evaluation that recognized many things, including that this is a significant crossing in the city of London. It's long been there. The current bridge was there for 100 years, and there was 3 more bridges preceding it. And so from a cultural heritage perspective, something unique needs to be or is recommended at this location. In addition to that, yes, there are hydraulic and considerations and the conveyance of the large storms in the river. Yes, there is a pier in the middle of the river now, and it's problematic in that it catches debris, which accumulates and slows down flows in the river and blocks, reduces the conveyance of the channel. So that one of the benefits of the recommended bridge type is it does have, it removes piers from the river, so it provides better conveyance. The alternative that is a concrete, standard sort of concrete slab on grade bridge actually has 2 piers. The current configuration has 1 in the middle. The alternative is recommended for both staging reasons and design reasons to accommodate a wider span, actually has 2 piers. So it would be subject to larger operating costs with respect to the debris. And then the other component is this species at risk in the natural environment, reasons for avoiding work in the river, so it reduces the regulatory burden and some cost there. So so that was the rationale behind the recommendation, and the environmental assessment was approved. This was a sort of fundamental part of the environmental assessment. So if the direction on this was to change, it would require an addendum to the environmental assessment. So there would need to be some revisiting of the alternative evaluation that was done previously, probably some additional public consultation, a return to Civic Works Committee and Council to get an endorsement on a new recommendation, and then a public review period. So it would, you know, that process, if it unfolded in that way, would probably take about 6 months, be some additional consulting fees, and would essentially put this design project on hold. The plan was to start now so that we have the design ready so that it can be positioned to fit within other project schedules on north-south corridors in the south half of the city. It's being coordinated with the others and will be slotted in to an opportune time, and that opportunity may come sooner rather than later, and that was why the design was getting started now. So if the environmental assessment was revisited, it would essentially, I think we'd need to put this project on hold because the design assignment is founded on that fundamental decision coming out of the environmental assessment.
Anything further, Councillor? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, and I hope staff don't feel like I'm badgering them on this, but I'm trying to wrap my head around how this fundamentally is different in terms of priority of getting a pier out of the river, when the recommendation we got back on Springbank Dam was, don't worry about removing the structure, it can stay there for a while. And that too is in the river, with concrete structures in the river. Although it's not functional as a bridge, and we won't be using it as a dam. But I'm trying to wrap my head around how these two projects are different in terms of a priority of getting something out of the river. Because I'm struggling with the fact that we can leave the dam in, but it's a priority to get this pier out.
Through the chair, I'll just speak to the conveyance and the relationship back to Springbank Dam. So in the case of Springbank Dam, of course, there would be a benefit to be able to remove piers from the water. It's just you have to weigh that against the positive benefit to the environment in doing that. So in this case, my understanding is that in this corridor, it's the south branch, it's not the full Thames River. It's more constrained and it's causing more of a problem from a flooding perspective. And so we need to maximize the conveyance. So relating that back to Springbank, there's a much larger floodway there. So the requirement to remove those piers is not, there is no requirement from a flood conveyance perspective. So that's why the two are a bit different. I don't think the whole reason to do the bridge, and I'll let Mr. McCrae speak to that, is to remove this pier. I think there's a lot of other rationale that's within the EA that supports that. But the aspect of the pier and removing it, there is that benefit for flood control, and that it's a more constrained area in the south branch versus the full Thames. But that's what
Thank you. Do you have anything else, Councillor Lewis? One more? Thank you.
I won't abuse the chair's indulgence in one more follow-up on this. So we come back to the financial matter on this then. And again, I come back to, I appreciate that there, are desires from the neighborhood for a certain aesthetic. That there's been a bridge on this site for a long time. Or are there, and is it possible through the detailed design phase that we may see a through arch bridge structure design that comes back that perhaps is not as expensive as originally budgeted for? Or is this like, are we getting like, this is going to be the cost, you're not going to get it any cheaper than this? Like, do we know if there are opportunities for the same style of through arch bridge that might still perhaps realize some cost savings?
At the public meeting for the environmental assessment, the arch bridge option was actually a tied arch, which, so if I'll use the top of my computer as the road, it's an arch like that. And when we heard the feedback at the public meeting, the cost of that was even higher. So we scrutinized that design and came up with the through arch, which it's founded down lower than the road, crosses the road plane about a third of the way into the river, and it's more of that configuration. So the tied arch alternative was a more economical than the tied arch. So we certainly scrutinized, the economic environment. Cost benefit is always a consideration, an important one in the environmental assessment process. So we've done some of that already. Through the design of the project, we'll continually look for ways to make the project as cost effective as possible. However, that said, until we go through all of that detail, I can't speculate right now. I can't commit that we would be able to find cost savings, but certainly it's always the goal of every project that we'll minimize costs as much as possible.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of comments from a heritage point of view. We don't have an arch bridge there now. And I don't see how that, we can go through the records of seeing what was there in the past, but right now, we're just replacing a bridge that does not have an arch. You know, from our perspective, from a council's point of view, what we're facing now with the budget coming up is drastically different than what the last council had with regards to a change in the provincial government and the financial hurdles that we're going to have to make in the next 6 months. So I can appreciate my fellow councillors for raising an eyebrow at $2.5 million extra for an aesthetic change. What struck me from reading the report was that actually alternative one, a concrete girder design, was the recommended alternative. So it appears that the concerns of flow and whatnot were dealt with when they looked at the cost benefit and came up with alternative one. It was changed with input from, was it 17 people at the public input meeting. I guess what I want to know is what would the cost be to revisit this? So we're looking at saving $2.5 million. What will we spend to delay this or to do another EA?
I just interject. I would like clarification. I think it's important. Is that an accurate number, this 2.3 million cost difference? I want to make sure that's an accurate number because it was in the councilor's correspondence, and I don't want us to make the assumption that that is the difference. If it is, that's fine, but I want to be clear on that for the committee.
Yeah, through the chair, the 2.3 million difference was previously provided last year as the difference between the through arch design and a sort of bare bones concrete girder bridge. However, if a standard concrete girder bridge is constructed, the cultural heritage evaluation recommends that enhancements are made, and the environmental assessment didn't take that alternative through to that final evolution. And so at the end of the day, depending on what those treatments are, the cost difference will be less, but we don't have the exact figure how much less. We would have to, we would have to develop a scope for the environmental assessment and revisiting it. It would not be starting an environmental assessment from step one. It would just be going back and doing an amendment. We'd reuse all the information that we have available. So it would not be, it would be a small percentage of the overall cost estimate.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff, just for clarity, there would be an amendment required to the EA if we decided not to accept the report as presented and make a change. The variance would not be the full 2.3. I'm hearing it be somewhere less than that, but still more than a base amount. And also looking at a consideration if this process potentially would take 6 months, interfere with other projects of how we're trying to schedule things, as Londoners are always complaining of how we don't schedule projects, that they're always stuck in lots of detours. And reading in the report that deferral of the construction is possible, but due to the condition of the bridge, there's a likelihood of additional maintenance and cost repairs. If we put this bridge off for the 6 months, that might put it to the next construction season. Do we know on average how much that might cost in maintenance? I'm not sure what the bridge is up for in repairs in the near future.
Through the chair, you are correct. We would stagger this project, its implementation with other projects on other parallel routes, such as the Warrencliffe Road grade separation and the Wellington Gateway bus rapid transit project, depending on the location in the corridor. So if we don't advance this design now, it's hard to speculate what year it ends up in, because it depends on the schedules of the other projects, but it could potentially be delayed several years. I don't have the additional operating costs per year of the emergency repairs that would be required, but I can say that, the sort of the order of magnitude would be, $100,000, $200,000 potentially, depending on the bridge condition and the way it's deteriorated and some of the concerns we've seen in recent years.
Anything further from the committee? Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. So again, our hope is to potentially save up to $2.3 million by delaying the project and paying a small percentage more for the EA. A question about the EA through you, Mr. Chair. Because the concrete girder bridge was the first choice, most of the work must have been done. Is that correct? So you said it's a small percentage of the work that needs to be done. Most of the data must be there. Is that correct?
That's correct. The technical work done for the environmental assessment will support the environmental assessment addendum, and that's why the fees would be a small percentage of the overall project cost.
Okay, that's great. I'd like to know about the operating cost for removing the trees that might catch on a pier, because you identified an operational cost. It'd be interesting to know, be interesting to quantify that, because I see in this bridge we're getting two things, Mr. Chair: an aesthetic benefit and an environmental benefit. And if we can quantify those, we can compare the two possibilities.
We don't have an accurate value at this time for the additional operating costs, but it's more related to risk management and the impedance of flows in the river channel, and the risk with respect to large storms and when they may happen. So it's more of a risk management in addition to the ongoing operating costs, but I'd say that it's more on the risk management side.
Well, thank you very much. So I'll make a few comments, Mr. Chair, and probably have this item be longer than you'd like it to be. But nevertheless, I think it's important for a number of...
Just a moment. I didn't say anything like that.
Okay.
I made no such comment. I will stay here as long as we have to stay to get this agenda done. And I would appreciate that. Yes, thank you. I never said such a thing. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So we see the new bridge has two benefits. There's an aesthetic benefit and an environmental benefit. And what I'd like to do is just for us consider the 80-20 rule. Can we get 80% of the benefit for 20% of the cost? So 20% of the cost that would be in this case $460,000. So to get an aesthetic benefit, there's lots of things we could do. I'd point out public art is a great one. We could make an investment there to provide some cultural heritage value. The entire 26 tree trunk carvings along the Hamilton Road tree trunk cost less than half of this amount. So we can see there's a possibility there for a small investment to have a large visual impact. I'll note that the communication I sent to the committee said we could build potentially a concrete girder bridge. We could build a concrete girder bridge with a wall that's a little bit wider and put on two of the existing trusses, and then we'd be able to incorporate some heritage value to this as well. And I think that's a possibility that would be worth looking at. But my biggest concern is for us to think about other priorities. So we can save money here, but realize we've got other big priorities, as was pointed out by Councillor Lewis. And I think for me, the big one is housing. And so I'll say to my colleagues, there's there's aesthetic benefits and there's environmental benefits for us to invest in housing as well. So an aesthetic benefit, one would be fewer people that find themselves sleeping in a business doorway because they think that the high visibility makes it less likely that they'll be robbed or assaulted than being someplace else. Environmental benefit might be the fact that we've got homes for people that would otherwise be tromping along the riverbanks, setting up camps, leaving garbage and needles and causing our bylaw people to tromp along the riverbanks and also clean up those things and scare the animals away. So we're in a position where we've got a lot of priorities to balance out. And I'm really pleased that we've got an opportunity to just talk about that. If we have the discussion and we decide to go with the bridge as recommended, that's fine. But I do want us to have that discussion, and my priorities are for us to not spend the money here, but look at other ways and realize that we've got a lot to deal with. Here's a place where we could save $1 or $2 million. I'll point out that the 20 people or so that came to these meetings, I'm sure would be very pleased with this bridge. You will recall that at the recent cycle of council, a woman came here and spoke on behalf of 20 organizations that all told us that housing should be considered an emergency and a crisis in London, and that we need immediate action. And I see this reprioritization as a form of immediate action. We can say, all right, we'll look at saving some money here so that we have it available to help those people in need. So I think those are my comments for now. I'm going to encourage my colleagues to vote down the proposal as we have it now, or I guess the other thing I could do is refer this back to staff to do this additional EA, and then we could make a decision at that point. So maybe through you to our staff, I could ask what might be the best approach for right now to achieve that end that I'm hoping to.
Just wonder, because we're talking about a past decision, I really want to provide the committee with a context of what happened during the last occasion. On the last occasion this came forward, a motion was made by Councillor Van Holst and seconded by me that this matter be referred back to Ms. Scheer to report back at a future meeting of the Civic Works Committee with a more cost-effective alternative for addressing cultural heritage concerns that would include an enhanced design for a concrete girder bridge, which incorporated special treatments, et cetera. So really, and then it said, with the goal of achieving an overall project cost savings of $1 million or more. So it was a similar motion to what Councillor Van Holst is making today. 4 councillors voted in favor of that, and 10 voted against. So the motion failed 10-4. And because it failed, there was a follow-up motion to proceed with what we're doing, what staff did, and that was unanimous vote of council to proceed on with that, except for Councillor Usher, who was absent. So I just want this committee to understand we've been through this before, and this really is a very much a revisiting of that issue. So I think that's clear. I'll refer your question now, unless.
If I may just add a little.
Oh, sure,
bit,
go ahead.
Yeah, so and that was the case, that was happened. I'll point out that we have a new council now. I noticed one of the comments that was made at the meeting is that we don't want bargain basement infrastructure, and I think that's one view, but also I think we're in a different position now, as was pointed out, financially, and I think we've got some tough decisions to make, and I'm trying to bring one of those tough decisions back. But of course, it may lose 10-4 again. It may pass, but I'll feel better if we've looked at that, because we know about what's needed.
I certainly am, Chair. There's probably no value in approving the motion that's before you if it needs to actually be defeated, because whatever the future consulting commission is would be revisited as a result of the direction to staff in terms of reviewing this project. What we would suggest that you do in terms of direction to us, should committee wish for us to review it, is the language that was used actually in last year's motion, where we would report back on potential cost savings opportunities prior to reopening the EA. So we may come back to you and say, we believe that we can do an aesthetic amendment to the concrete span bridge for a price of X. Do you wish us to reopen the EA and bring that out for public consultation? At that point, committee and council could say, you know what, we don't want to reopen the EA. We'll go with the original approval through the environmental assessment process. Or you may say that you choose to reopen the EA, in which case we would add 6 months, potentially up to a year, to be fair, because if there are any Part 2 orders related to this, and we anticipate there likely would be, the time can be significant. So ideally, if process-wise, if it's committee's will to defeat this, the short answer is defeat this, make the motion as was made last year, perhaps without the monetary target, because we may be able to be close, we may not be $1 million, it might be less, and we would report back to committee prior to making a decision about re-entering the environmental assessment process formally.
So I'm happy you asked that question. I think that's great advice if we could have the clerks prepare something like that. Although I guess we have to defeat this motion first. Is that?
Trying to provide some clarity to the discussion so that we knew what the last council had talked about. And I just wanted to be clear that something had been proposed to go back and ask staff to have have a look at this without really redoing the EA. That's what I was trying to point out. And and this is quite correct, we don't have to, we can just make this motion to refer it back for this savings. It will go to council next week and council can debate it, but, you know, that was a motion I supported last time and I would support it again, but I wouldn't support something today just from my point of view that says we're going back redoing the EA. I wouldn't do that. So I just want to be clear where I am. I would like to be consistent, so I'll vote the same way I voted last time.
Great.
So it's up to so it's up to, we need a motion on the floor in one way or another. Councillor Lewis.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chair, because you just spoke of referring this back. I think staff were actually very clear that the approach that would help them best is if we defeated this and sent it back with direction from a motion based on language that was presented in the last term of council. So I just want to make sure we're clear. Are we referring or if this is our will, is it a defeat and a new motion, or is it referring this one back?
Can I just be clear? I'm the governing officer of this meeting, not Ms. Scher. And Ms. Scher, I think, was proposing what she thinks would work. I want to be really clear that it was not defeated last time. There was just a referral motion made, and the clerk has told me that is the way that we would go ahead and do this. So, no, we don't need a comment from Ms. Scher. I'm the presiding officer. If you don't like my sort of view of it, then we can go from there. But I think that's the appropriate way to go. As again, it would be consistent with my position that I took before. So I leave it there.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to refer this item back to staff to report back to our committee with potential cost savings for this project.
Are you looking for a referral that sort of echoes exactly what happened last time, that you proposed last time? Is that what you want?
Yes, I think that's right. So I'll leave the possibility open that we do end up with the through arch bridge, but I'm.
Yes, and then what could happen at council is that the council could say, no, we don't support this, and they go on to approve the bridge. But it would leave it in council's hands, which I think is a cleaner way to do this.
Yes.
I'm trying to help.
Yeah, and I think that's.
So I'm going to have the clerk do the wording very similar to what was last time, and we'll get that on the floor. Thanks. And Councillor Lewis, I wasn't trying to be sharp with you. I was just trying to be lawyerly clear.
As a point of order, Mr. Chair, lawyers aren't always the clearest individuals in society.
See what happens to me at this committee? See how it goes? Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just wondering, as we're crafting that amendment, if we're looking for cost savings, can part of that also be outlining concerns with a cost increase or incurrence we might have of if we do relook at the design, that there might be increased maintenance costs, there could be increased concerns with other construction projects competing with each other.
I would assume that would take place, but I'll leave it to Ms. Sharon. She may have had something else she wanted to comment on.
Yes, Mr. Chair, certainly. We will provide our best estimate of the net. This is going to be fairly high-level work, but it should give you a sense of order of magnitude. We will also need approval for some nominal funds. We don't have any remaining funds in the existing contract with the consultant to do this work, and we will need consulting help to turn this around. So we will need approval of funds of approximately $20,000 to redo this scope of work, or we'll have to come back with a report next cycle asking for that funding.
I'll move that as well.
So we'll add that in, so everybody understands they need $20,000 to do this work. What I'm going to do is get this up, you can read it, and then you're prepared to move. Well, we'll wait until we see it, Councillor Van Holst, and then you can make a decision.
Okay. I'm very happy with this one. I think that'll.
All right, so do we have a seconder? You can take your time to read it. Councillor Lewis is seconding. Any comments?
I have one comment, just reminding us again that the Housing Development Corporation and London Middlesex Housing came to us and said we need to find maybe $400 million to renew our housing stock. This may be an opportunity to find one of that. So I'd like to see if that's a possibility.
Thank you. Any further comment? Councillor Plaza?
Mr. Chair, a concern through you. I don't believe any cost savings we may or may not find will be that we have the power to direct it to a certain project out of Civic Works and over to CAPS, like into a fund.
So I think that's a rebuttal to what Councillor Van Holst said. Okay, that's fine. Anything further, councillors? I just want to indicate that I'll be supporting the motion. The reason I'm doing that is it's consistent with the vote that an identical vote that I did last term. And so I appreciate other councillors that will take a different position at council, and I'm fine with that. I just myself need to be consistent with what I did before.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 4-1.
Before we move on to the next item, because of the nature of the in-camera, I'm suggesting we go into camera now, committee. So for the reasons set out on the agenda, and I need a motion to do that. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any comments? We'll call it up for a vote. Just to clarify, we will be coming back to this room because we have some other items we need to deal with in public session, and we'll better done in this room. So we're voting.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Okay, Vice Chair?
I just want to say that we received legal advice on a number of issues.
Do we need to vote on that? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 4.4, which is the Winter Maintenance Support Program. Mr. Parsons is here to make a brief presentation on this particular issue. Welcome.
Thank you for having me to talk about winter maintenance on a day like today. Any presentation? No? Okay. I have a short presentation that relates to the report. I'll go through it relatively quickly for you. Just sort of by the numbers, when snow arrives, our team manages over 3,700 kilometers of roadway, 1,500 kilometers of sidewalk, 750 cul-de-sacs, and over 2,100 bus stops, or there may be more now. A lot of the cost calculations in this report are related to the yearly summary of snowfall that I have up here as well, to give a sense of how many times we reach greater than 10 centimeters, greater than 8 centimeters, and 5, and so on, as it's related to the report and the resolution from the committee. Service level, we follow the provincial minimum maintenance standards we had since 2003. In May 2018 was the last revision, which included roadways, sidewalks, and on-road cycling facilities. Service level cost, this gives you a sense of what we spend. It's about 14.7 million. If you look across the graph, you'll see the blue is the budget, and we've exceeded budget a little bit over the last few years. And that's something that will have to be addressed as well. And here's our methodology. Pre-snowfall, we anti-ice. We use brine to treat the roads to help break the snow and ice from the roads to make it easier to plow. Lighter snowfalls, we're able just to deploy our salt trucks with front plows, and they're addressing our main roads, our class 1, 2s, and 3s, bus routes, our main roads. We have a shift on 24/7 that works from the end of October into March. Heavier snowfalls, then we get into some of our local streets when the snow accumulation reaches 10 centimeters. This is the order that we plow roads are main streets, bus routes, then our local streets. Sidewalk snow clearing, the service level currently is 8 centimeters before the, and we have 24 hours or 48 hours after the snowfall ends to clear down the sidewalk. It's not a bare pavement standard. And snowpack conditions are typical across the province and for service level. Bus stop service level, after the sidewalks are cleared, crews begin clearing bus stops. There's a council-approved standard, but at the same time, it is funded by London Transit Commission. We build them directly for this service, and for this service, bare surface are not a requirement. We apply sand if there's slippery conditions. And again, snowpacked surfaces are typical. The council resolution, which will focus of the report, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but essentially it's looking at 10 centimeters and or deploying resources at 8 centimeters or 7 centimeters respectively. Excuse me. The capital cost, we did quickly look at that. There's a little bit in the report on that, but essentially, in order for us to add a plow, a road plow, a city road plow, or a city sidewalk plow, is a significant capital cost. But at the same time, you want to consider that the piece of equipment is used winter and summer. So you can imagine a large truck plow, you take the plow off, it is used for construction projects. So there would need to be reciprocal. If it was used in the winter, we need to have an offsetting use in the other months. Same with the sidewalk machine, sidewalk plow, they're about $135,000. But they are used for mowing grass and in parks. So a service level would have to change there for us to consider something as a capital purchase. The next item would be lowering the threshold on sidewalks from 8 centimeters to 5 centimeters, and then increasing the customer service on snow clearing around school walkways. There's a small point in the report about reviewing our current plowing routes and available technologies, and that is touched in on the report. I'll jump right to the program support options that we're describing here. The first two options are related to residential roads. It's lowering the threshold to deploy plows And the first one is 8 to 8 centimeters, which if you go back to that chart I showed you at the beginning, I'm looking at 2 additional deployments based on historical records. The amount of times we receive 2 more times, 8 centimeters of snow over 10 centimeters. 500,000 there. Residential plowing on option 2 is moving it from 10 centimeters to 7 centimeters. So deploying at 7 centimeters of snow on residential. So it'd be based on historical records an additional 3 times. And that's how I was basing the costs. But also by moving to 7 centimeters in the second one, there will be some additional costs for the LTC for bus stop clearing. Because if you're clearing the road, you're going to develop windrows. It's going to end up in front of the bus stop, and we have to get out there and clean it. So in this particular option, going down to 7 centimeters, the LTC would see another hit of about 23,000 based on estimates. Options 3 through 5, related to sidewalk plowing. Option 3 is moving the threshold down to 5 centimeters. And based on that chart, right before, the number of snowfalls at 5 centimeters versus 8 centimeters, there's about 6 more times that we would have to deploy resources. And we'd be looking at additional equipment to help with that. Also, by going out that 6 more times, estimated cost of the LTC would be about $140,000. Option 4, prioritize school areas. And this is related to 8 centimeters. So the standard is the same, 8 centimeters. We will be looking at adding additional equipment so that we can clear one route to the main entrance of a school from our main roads going down a local street to get to a school. So I assess that as being more equipment. We would access the school from sort of the main entrance. And with that, it'd be about a $280,000 cost so that we don't hiring more equipment and not compromising what we're already doing on our main roads to get folks to transit stops. Option 5 is the same as 4. However, it's at a 5 centimeter response. And it's up to 520,000 because you have 6 additional deployments to do that. And also, when you think about what I didn't mention in the number 3 and 5, which is similar, when you get down to a 5 centimeter response and you typically plow local streets at 10 centimeters, you're going to have the sidewalk plow go into a local subdivision before the road plow. So what will happen is the sidewalk plow will go through, clear the sidewalk, and then the road plow will follow in if it's a 10 centimeters threshold and fill in the corners. So we're going to have to loop back. The reason why these costs are the way they are, we'll have to loop back and then clean out those corners again. So we're effectively have to go over some of those areas twice. You can get over them quickly, but we have to get to the intersections to clear out the windrows left by the road plow. So these recommendations, options are to be considered as part of the ones presented today as part of the 2020-2023 multi-year budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we start with questions first before we go to comments, councillors? Any questions? All right, then we'll open up to comments or questions. Councillors, Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. The current standards we have in place now, what percentage of the time do we meet them within the timeframes laid out? Certainly there are extenuating circumstances of major snowfalls, but on average, how are we doing as a city as meeting those targets?
Through the chair, we at one point we had to report that through our FIR and OMBI benchmarking initiatives. And at that time when we were doing that, we were well in the 90%, high 90%, generally only when there's a significant multi-day snowstorm.
Anything further from members of the committee? Councillor Van Holst.
Yeah, so it seems to me we have the, one option is to choose some of the options that you pointed out here. Or we could simply increase the budget as well and try to get more out of that. I see that our budget is getting close to, as we almost hit our budget most years. We're very close to getting that. So I guess my first question is, what's the chance that this coming year, we're going to need to increase the budget just to meet the minimum maintenance standards as they are?
Mr. Parsons, go ahead.
Through the chair, it's also important to know that although we have exceeded our budget, we also have a severe weather reserve fund with, I want to say it's about $1.3 million or $4 million. There's a significant amount of money in that reserve fund if we choose to use it, when we go over budget. Our budget is $14.8 million. We're reaching the upper limit of that now, depending on the type of November, December that we have. We could be in a position where we're in a deficit position. So if you look at our 5-year average, we're about $1.2 million over on average. Look on the chart on the second page.
And it looks as if we choose all the options you've given us, that would use up the entire, the entire reserve. Is that reserve replenished every year, or does that dwindle?
Through the chair, it is up to finance to when they would, I don't know if I can really speak to this, but it is up to finance to when they engage that fund. They might look at other avenues to help support the over budget position, but they do have the ability to go to a reserve fund. That's not only for winter, it could be for other events.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll save comments for later. I question first. Through you to staff and Mr. Parsons, you and I have discussed this individually, but for my colleagues' information, how does the length of London's snowplow routes, how long is our average route, and roughly how does that compare to the length of routes in other cities?
Through the chair, our routes are a little bit longer than we have done some comparisons with other municipalities. Our routes for road plowing and sidewalk plowing are, I'm going to say, 10% longer. Maybe the sidewalk plows might be a little bit more, 15% longer than what you see in other municipalities.
Anything further? Committee? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I brought this motion for the staff to investigate this way back in December, I think, or January. It's been a while. There was snow on the ground when I brought it forward. I remember that clearly. First, I want to say thank you to staff for all the work that's been put into this and providing this list of options for us. And I have to, in particular, say thanks to both Mr. Parsons and Mr. McCrae for putting up with my badgering number of questions by email and by phone as I tried to figure out how we can enhance our customer service for Londoners with regard to this program without being too much of a pain in their operational backsides, as it were. I am just sending back a motion. I just tweaked some language for our clerk in a draft motion here. So I'm just going to send that back to her and give her a chance to update that. But colleagues, I think when we look at these options here, we all hear from our constituents that they think that we can do a better job when it comes to snow plowing or snow removal in the winter. I know that we've all seen the comments on social media with regard to sidewalks and particularly the challenges facing people with mobility issues in using our sidewalks during the winter. It's great that we are meeting our provincial MMS, our provincial minimum standards 90% of the time, but I don't think that it hurts us strive to do better and where we can to provide some customer service enhancements on this issue. We are also, of course, facing some budget realities. And when I brought these forward, I thought all of these things were very important. But when I look to, and I did look back through the complaints that I received over the weekend through the course of December and February and January of this year, the big concerns were with the residential streets, the neighborhood streets, the crescents and the cul-de-sacs, where accumulations might happen for 2 or 3 snowfalls before a plow gets out there because of where the minimum standards thresholds are, and the sidewalks. Those were the 2 big ones. Folks in general, I think, are satisfied by and large with how we maintain our main arteries in the city. And I think that our snow clearing crews do a great job of that. I've talked to many plow drivers as well who appreciate when citizens make their job easy and are sometimes frustrated when citizens make their jobs a little harder. I think there's things that Londoners themselves can do to help improve winter road maintenance just by being courteous of our operators when they're out there. But what I would like to see is that we refer this back to staff to direct them to prepare appropriate language for a case for customer service enhancements for snow clearing that would look towards enhancing service at 8 centimeters for status 4 and 5 roads, which would be our neighborhood streets, and 5 centimeters for sidewalks when the current contracts we have expire, so as to meet or exceed the provincial MMS for the 2020 to 2023 multi-year budget. So I've sent the clerk language to that effect, and I believe she has it to put up for our consideration now.
Further comments by committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just a couple comments. I certainly heard concerns as well from residents. It was the roads 4 and 5s that aren't priority that people tend to get frustrated with because they don't see a plow for days. The other question I have is residents with mobility issues who are concerned when the sidewalk plows go through one way and then the other way, and it always leaves that little pile of snow that they can't quite get over with their mobility devices. Is there any opportunity for better enhancements to our system or how we clear those sidewalks to ensure that when a plow goes one way, then zooms the other way, that we don't leave that a barrier of snow for people?
Through the chair, I'm trying to understand, is that, so a sidewalk plow is leaving windrows, which they do, they use a V-blade, and a windrow will be the result of that. We don't have a way to go back and clear that very easily. Typically, we're clearing the sidewalk because that's a city responsibility, but if there's adjacent private sidewalks that meet up with it out of a business or out of a building, the property owners would clear that.
And a follow-up question in regards to how we clear, you mentioned it earlier, of how the sidewalk plows go out and we try and coordinate with our road plows that when the sidewalk plow, how is done and cleared its path, but then the road plow goes and fills in portion of the sidewalk where people are trying to cross. How does that work? Do we just need better GIS software so they can track who's where at once, or what could we do to help mitigate those issues?
Through the chair, typically when we deploy plowing equipment, we'll deploy the road plow. It will go out and clear the street or in a local subdivision first, followed by the sidewalk plow. Sometimes it can happen if you continue to get snow. The sidewalk plow will beat the road plow to that intersection. We note that, and we go back and clear out those intersections. That's what I was mentioning earlier. When we get into a 5 centimeter deployment, there'll be more. We'll have to loop back more often, and it's usually when you're looping back, you're just going back to the start of the plow route, and not, you wouldn't have to do the whole thing.
Anything further from the committee? Go ahead.
Sorry. And just one follow-up comment in general, if we're adding up the potential costs of item 2, 3, and 5, including the increased LTC bus stop clearing, you're looking at just over $2 million. And I can't not reference how we discussed earlier what $2 million could also purchase in regards to housing.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, just a point of clarification. The motion that I've got before us right now discusses options 1 and 3. And if councillors are totaling up the costs, 1 and 2 are 2 different options on the same opportunity, as are 4 and 5, which actually are not referred to in my current motion. Because I do think that school area sidewalks are very important, but I excluded them from my motion in terms of referring this back to staff, not because schools aren't important, but because honestly, and you'll see an item coming further in the agenda about new sidewalk programs and school priority being given, we have gaps in our sidewalk network that connect to our schools, further complicating how we remove snow in those areas. And so I think we have some work to do on our sidewalk program in general before we start making school zone snow clearing a priority. So as much as I would like to see school areas get greater attention, I recognize the budget constraints we have, and that's why I focused my attention on options 1 and 3 here, because I think that those will actually address probably you know, and I'm ballparking here, but I'm guessing in 80 to 90% of the residential complaints that we receive from Londoners with regard to snow removal. So this would be an operating cost that we'd have to consider in the multi-year budget. If we refer this back to staff tonight, it does not mean that we're approving that expense. It just means that they're going to provide us some appropriate language to consider that expense in the budget process. And I mean, I think in a corporation this size, this is a nuts and bolts service that people rely on and see the value from their tax dollars daily from about middle of November to end of March. And well, sometimes worse, but it could be worse. We could be in Winnipeg and see it from September to July, but luckily we don't quite have that here. So I hope colleagues will support this. Let's have staff have the opportunity to wordsmith how this might be appropriately delivered and come back to us with the price tag, and we will have a further debate on it in the multi-year budget process.
Councillor Van Holst.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm happy to second the motion to get some wording for this. Also, for my interest, a question through you to staff, just what kind of, if there's some, what kind of new technology is on the horizon for snow removal?
That's a good question. I sometimes see some new stuff that's out there at conferences, and you know, there's autonomous sidewalk plows that are starting to enter the market. Keeping an eye on that. They're typically used in like downtown locations. They kind of leave their docking port, and we'll plow a route as soon as the snow starts to fall, and then return to that docking route. So that's something that's very interesting. Certainly there's other types of websites that will track plows. It's in the report as well. So those are some new technologies that are available. Also for weather forecasting, having more weather stations around the city to help develop a more pure type of forecast. Typically all our forecast data comes from the airport. I think I mentioned in the report you can have a few centimeters in the east and 15 centimeters in the west. So those types of things are devices that would help us with snow depths. It would be something that we are looking at.
Okay, thank you very much. It's interesting how more and more data is important in more and more areas. Unfortunately, there isn't an attachment for my Roomba to help you out.
you can help me. What was that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I was making a joke about, there's a device that automatically sweeps your carpets and floors, but they don't have one for the, an attachment for the driveway and the sidewalks yet. I don't actually have one. I am the Roomba, I'm afraid, at my home.
Anything further from committee? No, I'm going to step out of the chair then. I think a couple of things have to be mentioned. And I want to mention first about what I consider the issue that no one's talked about, which I think is the biggest issue. Once we enhance our standards, we're accepting, in my view, a much higher level of legal liability for the work we're doing on the streets. And I think if we get in front of a court and somebody's hurt themselves and the City of London has now said, well, we're going to get out there and try to exceed the minimum standards, I think we're opening ourselves up to liability. And I think we at least have to know that and think about that as we move forward. The second thing I want to talk about is budget, because, you know, one of the things that I always talk about, council, is, you know, it's very easy as a politician to say, you know, let's give people something that they're going to like. And I could say, you know, there's a lot of things I could just say, let's do them. But you know what? We had a lady in front of us today who's having difficulty making a payment. And why? She put right in her letter that the taxes are getting there on her in terms of what she has to pay. So I understand the idea of referring it, and I understand that we haven't made a decision, but I'm really looking forward to the budget process at this I've enjoyed it in the past as I see councillors try to please the public and say, look, we're going to offer you more bells and whistles. Don't worry about the cost. And I think we're starting to add a lot more, and we're saying more and more, look, we're going to keep doing things. And I think we have to be honest with people and say, look, you know, these things are going to cost serious money. And $1.1 million a year turns into, after a few years, $5 or $6 million a year. And it's an issue of priority. So I'm content to refer this today. But I try not, you know, I think the money and the cost versus what we're solving or what we're doing is something we really got to keep in mind as we move forward. So I wanted to mention those two things. You know, I'm going to continue to try to focus on those key essentials that are important to people. And it's going to be interesting to be part of this budget discussion where we've set a budget target of 2.7% and we keep adding to the list of things that we're going to think about in the budget. And I just want to leave my colleagues with that thought. Anything further? Somebody want to call we have a mover, we have a seconder?
Yeah, Michael.
Michael, Councillor Van Holst, a second?
I'm happy to second that.
All right. And anything further? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
I'm happy to move the deferred matters list.
Do we have a seconder? For the deferred matters list? A seconder for the deferred matters list? Yes, Councillor Lewis. Anything further? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Next matter is an added matter, new sidewalk school priority. That's Councillor Lewis's matter. I note that it is just, before we discuss this, it's just a review, the assessment process, and I just anything want to speak to this? Somebody prepared to move and second it, Councillor? Do you want to, you're prepared to move it? Councillor Pelosa, second? Any discussion? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. Councillor Morgan and I had actually started to discuss this with staff prior to the Civic Works Committee having a discussion about the new sidewalks program for this year. And I want to thank staff again for their help in us in developing how we could review this. I think we all agree that school zones and school zone safety is important. That's why we're running a Respect the Limit campaign, where we brought in the 40-kilometer speed limit in school zones. But one of the things that Councillor Van Holst raised during the debate about the new sidewalk program was gaps in Ward 1, and I believe it was around St. Sebastian School, where there are some gaps in the sidewalk where students would typically use that route to walk to school. I have some similar gaps in a couple of the schools in Ward 2. And so this is just to ask staff to review their assessment process and add an additional assessment criteria for filling gaps in the school zones as part of the evaluation process of where we're infilling new sidewalks. So I don't think that I think that colleagues in general will be pretty supportive of this. I hope they are. I know that we all care about safety in our school zones, and making sure that those sidewalks are given a little extra consideration when we're filling in the sidewalk gap, I think would go a long way to doing that.
Yeah, thank you very much. That the councillor makes some good points there. I'm happy to support this as well. The issue I think we might consider is the possibility of pushing up the sidewalk program. We could do that. Of course, that might require taking on debt. But I would also point out that having the advantage of the sidewalks there may be worth the extra cost that we would want to take on. There's an opportunity cost to have sidewalks now. We can figure out what that is. So when we come up to the budget, we may want to consider that as well.
Anything further? All right. It's been moved. Sorry, I lost track.
Yep,
It's been moved
we're
and
good.
seconded. Call the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
Is the seventh report of the Cycling Advisory Committee. I don't think there are any direction items in there, so I'll just need a mover and seconder to receive. Okay, Councillor Van Holst is moving, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Anything further? Calling the vote.
Closing the vote, that motion passes 5-0.
And motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Call the vote. What?
Are we going to do it by hand?
We can do it by hand. All in favor? We're adjourned. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.